Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. My strength is a bit up, so let's see how far I can go with some reading. It's been a while since I've gotten to actually record. Haven't had the time and strength, so I try to do community posts for you all. Hope you're doing well. Let us continue, shall we? Reading The Handmaid's Tale. It is a very popular text amongst liberals, and you see it referenced a lot in American media and American pop culture, okay? So let's continue dissecting this text because I do believe it's a clever way to kind of get at religion and reach women of the younger generations and make them fearful of a theocracy, to be quite honest with you. Now remember, we were at the point where there's an anchorman on the TV talking about the news, and the entire household is there, watching it, okay? Picking up there on page 83. Bismillah. He tells us what we long to believe. He's very convincing. I struggle against him. He's like an old movie star, I tell myself, with false teeth and a face job. At the same time, I sway towards him, like one hypnotized. If only it were true, if only I could believe. So here she's really having this moment of self-reflection where she recognizes that the news isn't actually news, it's propaganda. CNN, anybody? Now he's telling us that the underground espionage ring has been cracked by a team of eyes, working with an inside informant. The ring has been smuggling precious national resources over the border into Canada. This text, it's fascinating because it puts America, aka now Gilead, against Canada. Like, there's a lot of smuggling going across because Gilead has resources, insiders, informants all over, okay, in other countries and whatnot. So they are extensive, but they haven't gotten world domination yet. So Canada plays a lot in this text and in the second book. And smugglers are popular in this text, and then in the second one as well. There's like lemons are like a gray market like economy thing, like a product. You get a lot of that where she shows you how much people try to skirt around the rules and whatnot. And remember, the eyes are like the Gestapo. They're the secret police, okay? 5 members of the heretical sect of Quakers have been arrested, he says, smiling blandly, and more arrests are anticipated. So the Catholics are outlawed and the Quakers are outlawed, and it appears it's like a Baptist sect. So she's done an interesting job here of touching into history about how Christians used to actually war with each other. Mormons weren't welcome. They were kicked out until they eventually made it to Utah. You have the Catholics who were really trying to go against the Calvinists and Protestants, So the rise of non-denominational Christian churches tried to solve that, which is quite ridiculous. But in this text in particular, she singles out the Quakers, and what's funny about the Quakers is they're known for being like really peaceful people. The few texts that I've read that have survived about the Quakers, you just seem like really bland people. So it's funny that the Quaker oatmeal, which is really bland, has like a guy on it. The Quakers are the bland oatmeal of the Christians, At least old school Catholics had a little bit of a, oomph in the trunk. Flaming people at the stake and whatnot. Little inquisitions, But the Quakers are not like that. So I do think it's funny that she has the passive Christians, the weakest Christian sect, being outlawed. 2 of the Quakers appear on screen, a man and a woman. They look terrified, but they are trying to preserve some dignity in front of the camera. The man has a large dark mark on his forehead. The woman's veil has been torn off, and her hair falls in strands over her face. Both of them are about 50. Now we can see a city, again from the air. This used to be Detroit, Under the voice of the announcer, there's the thunk of artillery. From the skyline, columns of smoke ascend. So you see like a very intense battle type of situation. You see that there's an active war going on, essentially. So if you watch the skyline of Beirut, there's streams of that. Watch the skyline of this or that in a war zone. You'll see the Associated Press have these live streams. I think Sky News has done some. I pass them sometimes on my feed, like, oh, let's see what's going on. And people just want to stare at this and see if they can catch a missile coming in or something. Resettlement of the children of Ham is continuing on schedule, says the reassuring pink face back on the screen. 3,000 have arrived this week in the National Homeland 1, with another 2,000 in transit. So, key figure here, key word, resettlement of the children of Ham. Children of Ham. You have people who call themselves the children of Jacob. That, like, sometimes Christians will have this way of, when they create different cults, to call themselves the children of a certain biblical figure. Okay. National Homeland 1 is a unique phrase. How are they transporting that many people at once? Trains, buses? We are not shown any pictures of this. So, that's a good question. But what she means by transporting, she's trying to hint at the Jays during World War II. Because when I read more into her books, and I read every single page of this book, and in the back, you know, there's parts where she talks a lot about how the Jays inspired her. And so, when you hear things like trains, this is like she's hinting to that. People being rounded up and whatnot. National Homeland 1 is in North Dakota. Lord knows what they're supposed to do once they get there. Farm is the theory. So here, you're seeing examples of, in her little universe she created, her apocalypse, there is tons of references to places that are conservative. And she really doesn't talk about those places favorably. So North Dakota being a farming area for the replanted people, and that's going to be the area of Homeland 1. You're like, okay. Like, she's presenting farming as something more negative, but the colonies are really the dystopian place you don't want to go, because that has all the fallout. Radiation fallout, toxic sludge, and that's what's been causing a lot of women to have unbabies, she calls it. So, would you rather be on a farm, or would you rather be a handmaid in that dystopian world? So, pick wisely is my point. Where's my pen go? Oh, here it is. Serena Joy has had enough of the news. Impatiently, she clicks the button for a station change. Comes up with an aging bassist baritone. His cheeks like emptied udders, whispering hope is what he's singing. Serena turns him off. So you can what I liked about this line is you can really picture it. Where you just turn it off, like, it's very old school, you know, of how we would interact with instead of pressing pause, you know, on our phones. It's more of like the old TV, like click. It kind of has a little bit of nostalgia, and even the TV would make that sound. If you recall those TVs that had the big back, you know. Now, on the smart TVs, it makes like a doot-doot sound when you turn it off. And the remotes are more flat, so they don't have necessarily that that same clicking sound. So it's different. But you can just picture how snappy Serena Joy is. But I want you to notice here as well how the main character, she likes to judge people. His cheeks like emptied udders, very saggy. If you think of a cow once it's been milked, it's got that hangingness to it. She's very judgmental, you know. And so let's scoot down. Alright. Now she's going to talk about when okay. She's gonna go into her kid, okay? And the book goes back and forth. 1 minute you're in the present, the next you're in her memory hole, okay? She thought we were going on a picnic, and in fact there is a picnic basket on the back seat beside her with real food in it, hard-boiled eggs, thermos and all. We didn't want her to know where we were really going. We didn't want her to tell by mistake, reveal anything, if we were stopped. We didn't want to lay upon her the burden of our truth. So here you get the tense anxiety of how much do you have to reveal and then how much to conceal. And when you're traveling and with the children, like she has one child, but if you're with children and you're in trying to get through a tough checkpoint and you don't want your plot to be discovered, you have to keep the children super calm so that they go along with the plan. Because if you're like, honey, we're trying to escape from this totalitarian government, they're going to come after us and rip us apart, that puts the child in fear. And obviously, when the checkpoint's like, what are you going out of the border part here for? They find out what you're really up to, guess what? You're going to be in trouble. So they have to be like, oh, we're just going on a picnic. And so they have the props and everything to make it convincing. I wore my hiking boots. She had on her sneakers. The laces of the sneakers had a design of hearts on them. Red, purple, pink, and yellow. So she's very descriptive about what people wear. And that's another thing that makes it really nice. Because you're seeing the main character. She's harnessing in on her memories. She's very astute in observing her surroundings. It was warm for the time of year, and the leaves were turning already, some of them. Luke drove, I sat beside him, the sun shone, and the sky was blue. So it's a pretty nice day for the most part, okay? And there doesn't need to be a lot of fear in the air, you would think, because of how pretty it is. It's not like a doom and gloom type of scenario. It's not like gray and misty. It's a pretty bright day, but there's still anxiety in the air. The houses, as we passed by them, looked comforting and ordinary, each house, as it was left behind, vanishing into past time, crumbling in an instant as if it had never been, because I would never see it again, or so I thought then. We have almost nothing with us. We don't want to look as if we're going anywhere far or permanent. So this shows the cleverness. Like, if they had a lot of stuff packed, it's going to alert the wrong people. But it's also scary to think, like, you'd have to travel in that emergency situation in a minimalistic manner, so you would only be allowed to bring the essentials with you. We have the forged passports, guaranteed, worth the price. So here, you see there's an underground market already of being able to forge documents. We couldn't pay in money, of course, or put it on the compute count. We use other things, some jewelry that was my grandmother's, a stamp collection Luke inherited from his uncle. Such things can be exchanged for money in other countries. When we get to the border, we'll pretend we're just going over on a day trip. The fake visas are for a day. Before that, I'll give her a sleeping pill so she will be asleep when we cross. Now, this reminded me when I first read it of how the cartels, when they're smuggling kids and, families, the kids are given sleeping pills. They're drugged. And I remember watching a video specifically, where there was a child, probably 3, 4, like completely lethargic in an unnatural manner. And the parent was carrying them, and the child was just knocked out, essentially, because they have to be quiet when they're sneaking. But what's really sad about that is how many kids can have a bad reaction and how tragic it is. But it's a real thing that happens. But here you see it, when you read it, you're like, okay, you need her to be quiet so she doesn't panic, and she doesn't get afraid. And when the child is sleeping peacefully, sometimes the guard sees that and he talks more quietly and just wants to get them on their way, and she's not able to reveal anything, right? So when you read that, you can think of many things. That's my point. That way she won't betray us. You can't expect a child to lie convincingly. And I don't want her to feel frightened, to feel the fear that is now tightening my muscles, tensing my spine, pulling me so taut that I am certain I would break if touched. So you can really get the character's sense of anxiety as a mom and you're trying to get out away from something dangerous with your child and your husband. You can relate to that. Every stoplight is an ordeal. We'll spend the night at a motel or better, sleeping in the car on a side of a road so there will be no suspicious questions. We'll cross in the morning, drive over the bridge easily, just like driving to the supermarket. So they have this whole plan about how they're going to ease on out and, be free from what's happening. We turn onto the freeway, head north, flowing with not much traffic. Since the war started, gas is expensive and in short supply. Outside the city, we pass the first checkpoint. All they want is a look at the license. Luke does it well. The license matches the passport. We thought of that. So, the gas point, there was a movie that liberals did called Civil War. I believe it was. It was a terribly boring, cliche, not very well done film. And it was about America if they had a civil war with a Republican, fascistic leader, which of course we knew they were hinting at Trump. That's why it just felt forced. Wasn't really great acting either. And there's these journalists who are traveling around the Civil War area, like where the battles are going, and there's a gas station and there's guys guarding it with large weapons. And gas has become pricey, and it's become a rare commodity during the civil strife. So when she includes that here in her book, the author, you can definitely relate to that. Because for now, a lot of military machinery requires gas, right? And so they're not all hybrids. I don't even know if they have hybrids, right? Solar panel, Tesla-like, whatever vehicles. No, they're usually fossil fueled. So they're going to try to maintain as much of that as possible, because when you're going through a civil war, you don't have as much GDP to really be purchasing a bunch of barrels at a good price. People aren't conducting business as usual, so the economy is disrupted and people have less money. And you could also argue that it's intentional to kind of make it harder for the masses to have gas so that they can't really travel, and to limit how much money they have, because they're going to have to choose between food or gas. If you recall, not too long ago, California had gas for like $8 a gallon. And luckily, we have markets where we shop close to us. But that's pretty scary if you have to commute far for work every day. So Biden, he just did a very terrible job with the economy. And Kamala Harris is just pure garbage. So when you have to ration between gas and food, you can see how you wouldn't choose gas at that moment. So they're using whatever money they have left to get gas so that they can try to escape, right? So you got to think about that all-encompassing picture when you look at this. Okay. Back on the road, he squeezes my hand, glances over at me. "You're white as a sheet," he says. "That's how I feel. White, flat, thin. I feel transparent. Surely they will be able to see through me. Worse, how will I be able to hold on to Luke, to her, when I'm so flat, so white? I feel as if there's not much left of me. They will slip through my arms as if I'm made of smoke, as if I'm a mirage fading before their eyes. Don't think that way," Moria would say. "I think that way, and you'll make it happen." Oh, sorry. think that way and you'll make it happen. So here again, that character Moria, who I don't like, you see the character has a close affiliation and affection with that character. You know. Cheer up, says Luke. He's driving a little too fast now. The adrenaline's gone to his head. Now he's singing. Oh, what a beautiful morning, he sings. Even his singing worries me. We've been warned not to look too happy. So here you can see another thing where even happiness is suspicious, you know, because the authorities are going to be like, what you smiling about? You know what I mean? Let's see what's going on. So you can see the surveillance. It's a very apt name when they have the eyes, where it's like they're all watching you, you know, which is fine. I mean, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching us. So if you already live like that, like you want privacy from other humans, which is true, but too much privacy, I think, is a problem, and you become weird, isolated, and eccentric, you know. That's why the crazy cat lady in the woods always was called a witch, because all that isolation makes you a bit kooky. But China, which is a communist atheistic state, they have Skynet and facial recognition technology. You're watched wherever you go, and you're tracked. It's a very different society. So I feel when she mentions it, she's kind of hinting at some type of technocracy. Okay, now we're in chapter 15. So let's continue there. This is a new, now it'll go on to something else, okay? So that part of her memory is over, but we'll get to another part with the commander. The commander knocks at the door. The knock is prescribed. The sitting room is supposed to be Serena Joy's territory. He's supposed to ask permission to enter it. She likes him to keep him waiting. It's a little thing, but in this household, little things mean a lot. Tonight, however, she doesn't even get that, because before Serena Joy can speak, her steps forward into the room anyway. Maybe he's just forgotten the protocol. Maybe it's deliberate. Who knows what she said to him over the silver-encrusted dinner table, or didn't say. So the commanders wear black uniforms, okay? And she's going to describe him a little bit, alright, what he looks like. Now, the commanders is like a military position. So she's in a ranking household, okay? Now, notice how she says, like, that's Serena Joy's territory and how little things mean a lot. There's a lot of regulations and behavior in Gilead for everybody. The commander has on his black uniform, in which he looks like a museum guard, a semi-retired man, genial but wary, killing time, but only at first glance. After that, he looks like a mid-Western bank president, with his straight, neatly brushed silver hair, his sober posture, shoulders a little stooped, and after that there is his mustache, silver too. After that, his chin, which really you can't miss. When you get down as far as the chin, he looks like a vodka ad in a glossy magazine of times gone by. So here you get it like a really, description of the commander, and she wasn't as harsh. I think of like a Dos Equis commercial. If you thought about how like there's this suaveness, like a sort of genial suaveness, this is kind of how I pictured him in my head. His manner is mild, his hands large, with thick fingers and acquisitive thumbs. His blue eyes uncommunicative, falsely innocuous. So he's got blue eyes. He looks over us as if taking inventory. One kneeling woman in red, one seated woman in blue, two in green, standing a solitary man, thin-faced in the background. So, as if taking inventory. So you're like, checking over everyone. He's the leader of a household. So the two in green, those are the Marthas. Marthas, think of them as a kitchen wench. And the more Marthas you have, the more high-ranking you are. the powder blue, baby blue, is what the wives wear. And then handmaids wear red, obviously. And the chauffeur, Nick. And he's going to read a Bible story. And I found this section kind of weird. Because when you think of like a Bible reading, I think of like a Christmas scene where someone's reading the Bible by the fire. They got the Christmas tree out. But she kind of makes it weird in a way. Okay? So, now, she didn't say, oh, let's, pull out the Torah and, do a scene like that. No. This is a very anti-Christian book. He manages to appear puzzled, as if he can't quite remember how we all got in here. As if we are something he inherited, like a Victorian pump organ, and he hasn't figured out what to do with us. What we are worth, we are worth, he gets at as well. It's like very interesting how she still has a way to complain about anything and everything. He nods in the general direction of Serena Joy, who does not make a sound. He crosses to the large leather chair reserved for him, takes the key out of his pocket, fumbles with the ornate brass-bound leather-covered box that stands on the table beside the chair. He inserts the key, opens the box, lifts out the Bible. Now, you may be wondering, why is the Bible under lock and key? Women in Gilead are not permitted to read the Bible. Now, if you recall, Catholics did, historically, keep the Bible away from the masses. And then the Protestants came along and said, no, everyone has a right to read the Bible. So it's very bizarre how people forget that. An ordinary copy with a black cover and gold-edged pages, which is the typical old-fashioned way. The Bible is kept locked up the way people once kept tea locked up, so the servants wouldn't steal it. It's an incendiary device. Who knows what we'd make of it if we ever got our hands on it. We can be read to from it by him, but we cannot read. Our heads turned towards him, we are expectant. Here comes our bedtime story. So see how she's a little bit mocking there? Like, oh, our bedtime story. Something you read to the children. And so, only the leader of the household can read the Bible. Which is a bizarre touch, but she really wants you to have resentment for men in the book, right? Of a household leader, a man who leads the family. She's very feministic, the author, so she wants to create something where you feel uncomfortable and you want to fight with the commander, The commander sits down and crosses his legs, watched by us. The bookmarks are in place. He opens the book. He clears his throat a little, as if embarrassed. Could I have a drink of water, he says to the air. Please, he adds. Behind me, one of them, Cora or Rita, leaves her space in the tableau of pads off towards the kitchen. The commander sits looking down. The commander sighs, takes out a pair of reading glasses from inside his jacket pocket, gold rims, slips them on. Now he looks like a shoemaker in an old fairy tale book. Is there no end to his disguises of benevolence? So, disguises of benevolence. So, she really sees him as an evil figure, but we must ask ourselves, he has done nothing wicked towards her. She's got food. Yeah, she's in a position that she chose that's not the best in the world, right? Have to basically be a surrogate in a way, and then transfer to a new household. But he hasn't tortured her. He hasn't beaten her. She's not like... It's not like he's Ramsay Bolton. So, what really is there to complain about? She's not in the best situation, because she's not free with her children and whatnot. But she does have, a pretty decent setup. If you really look at it. She could have been an econ wife, or she could have been sent to the colonies. So, You need to think about that. So, disguises of benevolence, like underneath that he's some type of horrid monster. And later on, you see that that's really unfounded. We watch him every inch, every flicker. To be a man watched by women, it must be entirely strange. To have them watching him all the time. To have them wondering what is he gonna do next. To have them flinch when he moves. So see here, flinch when he moves. Why? There is zero evidence. Okay, let me give you a little story. Because this one touches a nerve with me. Like, that's when someone has really battered you. When someone has shown the extreme violence. I remember there was a couple. One guy was a white guy. He worked in computer engineering. And his wife was Chinese. And she worked as an accountant in San Francisco. Their daughter, they would sometimes play with my daughter. And we would chat us by, the trees while the kids played for 25 minutes after the bell rang, right? And one time her husband told me, yeah, but those Muslim women, they're like little scared mice. Like that they're very frightened. And they're like, ooh, of their husbands. And I don't like that kind of control over women. And it's a very ignorant comment, right? And, I tried to explain that that's not the case with every woman and whatnot. But he was essentially a liberal feminist male. Not really much I can do in that type of situation to convince him that he's kind of gone off stereotypes, right? But he has this caricature of the frightened, battered, mousy, sketchy, frigid, traumatized Muslim woman in his brain, who's deathly afraid of her husband. And if you contrast that to the amount of women who on film in America beat on men, and the men just stand there, women throw drinks on the men, they, I remember a lady in McDonald's who was one of the, I always mention this clip, but she looked like a cheap copy of Nicki Minaj, and her boyfriend was this tall, Shaq-looking dude. He's really tall. He looked very similar to Shaq, except a little bit more chubby. And she didn't want to eat at McDonald's, so she pulled out her phone, right? And they get the tray of food at McDonald's. She flipped the tray and went all over him, and then she threw food in his face, and was putting her hand with her dinosaur claws all up in his face, rubbing things in his face. Totally uncalled for. He's just standing there taking it, and she's going off the wall. And it's crazy, how many women will get really violent. Even think about in fiction, where in The Sopranos, that Mercedes car dealer lady who ends up unaliving herself, she throws a steak at Tony, and she goes crazy, The amount of women who choose violence is very high, but they don't really get talked about as much. But the men are always put as they're afraid and timid. So when she inserted that here, there isn't really a motive for it. Yeah, he has a lot of power in terms of he can send the handmaid away, he can send the Martha away, he can even send his wife away. But there's no evidence thus far in the text to suggest that he's a tyrannical figure. In the second book, we get Commander Judd, and he's a sort of creepy Henry VIII type of figure. Spoiler alert. And that would make more sense because there's a buildup of the character. But she has not built up the commander here to be that kind of wickedy figure, how she just described him. He just seems like a bank teller, And then more along later in the book, you see that he's not that bad at all. Even if it's harmless enough move to reach for an ashtray, perhaps. So look at that. He's just reaching for an ashtray to flick his cigar on. And they're like, why are you so skittish? What are you, a deer. Like, come on. To have them sizing him up, to have them thinking, he can't do it, he won't do, he'll have to do. This last as if he were a garment, out of style or shoddy, which must nevertheless be put on because there's nothing else available. To have them putting him on, trying him out, while he himself puts them on like a sock over a foot, onto the stub of himself, his extra sensitive thumb, his tentacles, his delicate stalked slug eyes, which extrudes and expands, winces and shrivels back into himself when touched wrongly, grows big again, bulging a little at the tip, traveling forward, as if along a leaf, into them, avid for vision. So this is one of her poetic kind of weird ramblings. You're right? You're like, okay, you're talking about tentacles. Talking about tentacles. And then a sock, you know, but she's doing the whole sizing him up. But, okay, a slug eye, they're very delicate. You know, I've taken some videos of slugs, and we get big old snails too. They're very gentle creatures, and you watch the crows just shatter their shells and eat them up. They ain't got no self-defense, really, you know. And you put a little salt on them, they die. They're not very strong at all. And winces. So, one minute, people are flinching, and the next she's describing him as someone who winces. And he's got a sensitivity, and he's like a slug eye, and now she's insulting him, right? Talking about bulging eyes. It's just, make up your mind. How are you seeing them in your head? To achieve vision in this way, this journey into a darkness that is composed of women, a woman who can see in the darkness while he himself strains blindly forward. She watches him from within. We're all watching him. It's the one thing we can really do. And it's not for nothing. If he were to falter, fail, or die, what would become of us? No wonder he's like a boot, hard on the outside, giving shape to a pulp of tenderfoot. That's just a wish. I've been watching him for some time, and he's given no evidence of softness. Okay, no evidence of softness. You have given us no evidence of his harshness. You see what I'm trying to tell you? It's like, he's in the military. He has an extensive household. You can't have a flowery commander. It just doesn't work. You look at all the men in history who made something of themselves in their military adventures. They weren't these pansies, you know. They weren't like Jesse Pinkman of Breaking Bad. They couldn't be soft. You're in the contest of war, in the contest of empire. You can't be too soft. You can be merciful, but you can't be too soft. But you can't be too harsh either. You know, can't be no Bashar al-Assad, who is weak but uses the state to oppress, right? But watch out, Commander, I tell him in my head. I've got my eyes on you. One false move and I'm dead. So, it is true that the commander has control, like I said. And she can't make him upset. So, she is right that he does have this ability to make her life more difficult. Still, it must be hell to be a man like that. It must be just fine. It must be hell. It must be very silent. So, here you see the contradiction going back in her head about how she doesn't know how to view this man. Just fine, and then be hell, those are opposites. It's fine because he's got food, he's got security, he's got a handmaid, all that jazz. He's got some Martha, so he's getting some good food. His belly ain't empty, he's got status. You know, but, so for the most part, he has no children. So, that would be hard. Because children are very valued. And he has the handmaid in order to solicit children. He wants a child. And he has a lot of rules that he has to follow. And then when she says it must be very silent, the commanders, though, as we learn later, they're not very silent. They have secret clubs that they go to where there's lewd women, brothel culture. They're not silent at all. They have the decorum of, well, the facade decorum of having everything tight-knit, but it really isn't the case. But they can't be very talkative to other members in the household. So he's not being jovial. He's not old Saint Nick. He ain't Santa Claus, talking to the elves every day. But he is a sort of stoic figure of the household. Okay. Okay, then he reads from the Bible. Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay. I check the clock during dessert. Canned pears with cinnamon, standard for lunch. And look for Moria in her place, 2 tables over. So now we're back in the past, when she was still at the Red Center, where you see how the handmaids are trained. I put my hand up. I am excused. We don't do this too often, and always at different times of the day. So you see the structuredness of the Red Center. In the washroom, I go to the second last stall as usual. Are you there? I whisper. Large as life, I'm twice as ugly. Moria whispers back. What have you heard? I asked her. Nothing much. I've got to get out of here. I'm going bats. I feel panic. No, Moria, I say. Don't try it. Not on your own. I'll fake sick. They'll send an ambulance. I've seen it. You only get as far as the hospital. At least it'll be a change. I won't have to listen to that old bitch. They'll find you out. No, not to worry. I'm good at it. When I was a kid in high school, I cut out vitamin C. I got scurvy. In the early stages, they can't diagnose it. Then you just start it again and you're fine. I'll hide my vitamin pills. Moria, don't. I couldn't stand the thought of her not being here with me. For me. So you see the attachment she has to the character Moria. And you see the bit of vulgarity and the tenacity, though, of Moria. And she thinks she's smarter than everybody else. And she has a rebellious spirit. They send 2 guys with you in the ambulance. Think about it. They must be starved for it. Shit, they aren't even allowed to put their hands in their pockets. The possibilities are, you in there. Time's up, said the voice of Aunt Elizabeth. Okay, so this is how you get this weird vibe. Some of the men they're not allowed to have wives exactly yet, and they are technically starved for female affection, and they can't put their hands in their pocket. But how many men in public put their hand in their pocket and do that? It's not something they would do that while they're in the shower or when they're secluded because there's no cameras where those people sleep. So this part of the book, I mean that section, it doesn't really make sense because men can always find a way to do that, and it can be over in like 4 minutes, and it's not like they are constantly surveyed and they never have privacy. I mean, they're allowed to sleep in their bed and, they can turn over on their side, But she just has this vulgarity. And then you see Aunt Elizabeth where you have a certain time in the bathroom. You're not allowed to just be dilly-dallying in there all day. The aunts are really smart. And they know what's up. I stood up, flushed the toilet. 2 of Moria's fingers appeared through the hole in the wall. It was only large enough for 2 fingers. I touched my own fingers to them. So like you see the things they do of affection. Quickly held on, let go. And Lay said, God had given to me my hire because I had given my maiden to my husband, says the commander. Now we're back into the living room. He lets the book fall closed. It makes an exhausted sound. Pump! Like a padded door shutting by itself at a distance. A puff of air. The sound suggests the softness of the thin, oniony pages, how they would feel under the fingers. Soft, dry, like paper poudre, pink and powdery from the time before. So, there's some Bibles that have the thicker paper, but I have a copy of the Jehovah's Witnesses one where it is very tissuey. It is very soft like that. but it's smaller and compact. But I also have another Bible. It's like a companion study aid Bible. It's got maps in it, and it has gold on the edge of the pages, and it's black, kind of like the one they described here. But it's like a companion study Bible, and when you close it, it does make that sound. So that one is very descriptive. So I'll give him that. So I'm not gonna read the part where they have this ceremony, but it's a very bizarre thing, which is a bit kinky. The wife is there, has to hold the woman's arms. They're not allowed to be nude. He only gets access to that part that he needs. It's a very strange type of ritual. And whenever women write about lusty things, it's always, to me personally, an insight into their own attitude. You know? It's just really bizarre. Okay. Alright. Okay, let's see. Hold on. Because it goes back and forth. I wanted to get ready. Okay. Let's see. Okay, they scratched the writing on my cupboard wall. Floats before me. Left by an unknown woman with the face of Moria. I saw her go out to the ambulance on a stretcher carried by 2 angels. So, you see the angels are like people who, work around the handmaids. They're not angels at all. They're like police. So, she took the word angel and inverted it in her book. Because their behavior is not angelic. We're back at the Red Center, by the way. What is it? I mouthed to the woman beside me. Safe enough. A question like that, to all but a fanatic. So here she, again, insults the true believers of the Galadian society. And you're not really allowed to inquire too much, to get suspicious of things. And you have to know what you can and can't say, because some people, in order to get more status, they will inform the aunts of, like, what you do. Whatever you say, whatever you're interested in, the aunts got their informants watching people. So that's why she says that. A fever she formed with her lips. Appendicitis, they say. I was having dinner that evening. Hamburger balls and hash browns. That actually sounds good. My table was near the window. I could see out, as far as the front gates. I saw the ambulance come back. No siren this time. One of the angels jumped out, talked with the guard. The guard went into the building. The ambulance stayed parked. The angel stood with his back toward us as they had been taught to do. 2 of the aunts came out of the building with the guard. They went around to the back. They hauled Moria out, dragged her in through the gate and up the front steps, holding her under the armpit. So you can see the dragging. Like, this is a very aggressive stance to have with someone who has tried to pull a trick. The aunts of Gilead, they know what's up. And they don't take no shenanigans. She was having trouble walking. I stopped eating. I couldn't eat. By this time, all of us on my side of the table were staring out the window. The window was greenish with that chicken wire mesh they used to put inside glass. Aunt Lydia said, "Eat your dinner." She went over and pulled down the blind. So Aunt Lydia, I thought I liked her, and in the second book, she turns to be a total secret agent. Takes down her own empire. But, so don't get too much on Aunt Lydia's side. They took her into the room that used to be the science lab. It was a room where none of us ever went willingly. So, remember, like, there's rooms that are repurposed, okay? Remember in the beginning of the book, the gymnasium? That's where all of the handmaids would sleep. So, buildings are repurposed. So, the science lab is now a place where strong interrogations occur. Afterwards, she could not walk for a week. Her feet would not fit into her shoes. They were too swollen. So, okay, this hints at I've done a lot of deep diving into torture methods that different regimes would use. And obviously, with the Nazis, they had a lot of ways of targeting one specific area of your body. In America, one of the things that they would do is, putting a needle under your fingernails and then slowly removing fingernails. And what do they call in Egypt? I might butcher the name. Muhabara? I forget. But there's ways that, they systematically take people down and break you apart by isolating one part of your body, whether it's your tongue, whether it's your knees and whatnot. And so you see here, when they find out, like, hey, you had a stunt, now you're going to learn the hard way, Moria. So your feet. And at first you may be thinking, what could be so bad? But with that type of swollenness, and it's targeted just for your feet, then you realize how vulnerable you are. It's difficult to shower, to do the things you have to do, because you can't use your feet. It was the feet they do for a first offense. They used steel cables frayed at the ends. After that, the hands. They didn't care what they did to your feet or your hands, even if it was permanent. Remember, said Aunt Lydia, for our purposes, your feet and your hands are not essential. So here, remember, the handmaids are for their wombs, okay? And their area, that's the main part. Your womb, just that area is the most important. And at first you could say Aunt Lydia's mean for saying that, but it is a very intimidating line, isn't it? Moria lay on her bed, an example. She shouldn't have tried it. Not with the angels, Alma said. From the next bed over, we had to carry her to classes. We stole extra paper packets of sugar for her from the cafeteria at mealtimes, smuggled them to her at night, handing them from bed to bed. Probably she didn't need the sugar, but it was the only thing we could find to steal, to give. So you see how the handmaids have ways of supporting each other? Little things they do. I mean, I don't know, how many dentists they have in Gilead, but I mean, needing that kind of sugar, I would say give me a mayonnaise packet, you know what I mean? But, sugar packets, I'm still praying, but what I am seeing is Moria's feet. The way they looked after they brought her back. Her feet did not look like feet at all. They looked like drowned feet, swollen and boneless. Except for the color, they looked like lungs. So you can see what the extensiveness, okay? Now, here you just got a picture of how they're going to make you toe the line, okay? Every place with structure, whether it's prison, a black site of the CIA, there's a structure and a system of punishments. Now, liberals are soft on crime, and they don't even want the death penalty for some people who do the most heinous crimes. No, they want them to be able to have very valuable resources, and they don't even want those inmates to work. So if someone's done heinous crimes, they can't be rehabilitated. They can't be reintegrated into society. They fill their cells with poop and they attack guards. They're just a mess to take care of. If you made them go work in a coal mine or build a railroad or do something like that, the liberals will say that's really cruel. They shouldn't be forced to work. They should just sit around all day, consuming, not producing. But if you look at how each person in Gilead is expected to do something for the society, you begin to see why they have such stringent modes of keeping people in line. And in Japan, when I was looking at what their prison systems are like, some of the prisons is like, the guards come in, bed has to be made, things have to be clean, like, you have to be super organized or you'll be punished. Okay? So make things tidy. And inmates usually do that themselves because there's nothing else to do. So they get very clean. And they like things where they like them. But the prison, one of the prisons in Japan had a very systematic way where things had to be. And then if you look in China, their interrogation methods are also pretty intense. There's no doubt that America does the same thing, but it's just more quiet, more hush-hush. I'm not saying that's the best thing to do. I'm just pointing out that when you go to a facility where they're meant to change you into a new person, there's gonna be the carrot and the stick method. There's gonna be incentives and there's gonna be punishments. And liberals pretend that you can only get someone to change by baiting them with treats, and ignoring that sometimes physical punishments or deprivation of something can bend the will to where it needs to be. They only point out when that's misapplied to someone who doesn't deserve it or who is a weak soul. But they don't look how it can help bend the monster. Because ironically, what does the bull's nose ring represent? That's installed when they're a baby, when they're a calf, and you grab onto it, and it hurts, and the bull will listen. And then when they grow up, and you got a big ox or something, and they don't really want to pull the cart out of the mud, you grab them by the nose ring, just a little tug, and then it's painful, and they remember it from their, like, you can't say childhood because they're not children, but from their calfhood, and then they start going, right? Big beasts that have a stubborn nature, that have ways of getting them to obey in certain moments. You know, dogs, you can reward it with, piece of meat. Others, a horse has to run by getting whipped. There's just certain things where you have a balance. And their job in the Red Center, the Aunce's job, is to take disobedient, rebellious, disbelieving women and form them into productive, pious, Christian women who will believe in the creed of the society and obey the rules so everything can function the way it's supposed to function, and so they can get rid of anarchy in their society and continue their empire. So, punishments in general, it's a very fascinating thing when you really look at the ethics of it. What's the right balance? It's a very fun thing to look into. But the feet, I just thought was a very clever way, looking like lungs. It's hard for her to walk. She has to be taken to classes. They dragged her up the stairs. But Moria is a very rebellious character, and they don't want her attitude spreading to the women. Because what I learned in the second book was one of the main characters, Agnes. She has great manners that she got from Gilead. Very graceful. Reminds me of that Harry Potter character, those French girls in the Order of the Phoenix, Like, they're very graceful, very polite, very classy. Princess-like, I'd argue. And you can see the greatness of that. Whereas Daisy, aka Baby Nicole, is more tomboyish, guttural, and like Moria, and you see the contrast of the snarky, boyish girl, and then you see the feminine, classy, graceful, very feminine-oriented archetype. And you can see that Gilead has that vibe to it. And the older aunts bring upon the archetype of the very serious nun. And Hollywood has always framed the nuns as that. And we know that there's some truth to that. And I don't see anything wrong with that, because everybody got to have that stern grandma. You don't want to be too strict. But there's nothing wrong with having some stern believers. You can be sometimes very smiley and very soft, but if you're too soft, people take advantage of you. And they're trying to form these women into something better. When you go into the military, they're pushing your body to its limits. Oh, you didn't listen? Okay, you gotta go give me 20 laps. You gotta give me 100 push-ups. You gotta go clean the latrines. Like, they have punishments for you. They may not always be, like, flogging, but there's punishments. And if you look in the past at different devices that were used, like I saved a screenshot, but it was a piece of wood. You put your head, it opens like a sit like this. You put your head through, you put your arms through, and they would leave you to stand there in the town square in Europe, and people would pass you by and say, like, you're being punished. Like, every society has ways of enforcing good behavior. So Gilead is not too far away from that, okay? So just remember that. Oh, yes. Okay. Alright, the next time we'll discuss, inshallah, chapter 16. And so, it's a very interesting book, okay? But I wanted to dissect it and really analyze it so that we can kind of break off a lot of misconceptions, really come at it from a different angle, because that's the fun part about breaking down literature, is you come at it from multiple perspectives, and this is very beneficial to those of us who want to go beyond the surface and really look at the implications of what's being said and what we can extract from it. I hope you enjoyed. Take care. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Join the blog at www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive, and have a good day.